Suharto, the 8th of June 1921 to 27 January 2008, was the second president of Indonesia, holding the office for 31 years from the ousting of Sukarno in 1967 until his resignation in 1998. Suharto was born in a small village, Kemusuk, in the Godean area near the city of Yogyakarta. During the Dutch colonial era, he grew up in humble circumstances. His Javanese Muslim parents divorced not long after his birth, and he was passed between foster parents for much of his childhood. During the Japanese occupation of Indonesia, Suharto served in Japanese organized Indonesian security forces. Indonesia's independence struggle saw his joining the newly formed Indonesian Army. Suharto rose to the rank of Major General following Indonesian independence. An attempted coup on the 30th of September 1965, backed by the Indonesian Communist Party, was countered by Suharto-led troops. The army subsequently led an anti-communist purge which the CIA described as one of the worst mass murders of the 20th century, and Suharto wrested power from Indonesia's founding president, Sukarno. He was appointed acting president in 1967, replacing Indonesian founding father Sukarno, and elected president the following year. He then mounted a social campaign known as Sukarnoization in an effort to reduce the former president's influence. Support for Suharto's presidency was strong throughout the 1970s and 1980s. By the 1990s, the New Order's authoritarianism and widespread corruption were a source of discontent and, following a severe financial crisis, led to widespread unrest and his resignation in May 1998. Suharto died in 2008 and was given a state funeral. The legacy of Suharto's 31-year rule is debated both in Indonesia and abroad. Under his New Order administration, Suharto constructed a strong, centralized and military-dominated government. An ability to maintain stability over a sprawling and diverse Indonesia and an avowedly anti-communist stance won him the economic and diplomatic support of the West during the Cold War. For most of his presidency, Indonesia experienced significant economic growth and industrialization, dramatically improving health, education and living standards. Plans to bestow Suharto with a national hero title are currently being considered by the Indonesian government and has been highly debated in Indonesia, including many of those who were previously strong vocal opponents to Suharto being in favor of the title. According to Transparency International, Suharto was the most corrupt leader in modern history, having embezzled an alleged $15-35 billion during his rule. Early life. Suharto was born on the 8th of June 1921 during the Dutch East Indies era, in a platted bamboo-walled house in the hamlet of Kemusuk, a part of the larger village of Godean. The village is 15 kilometers west of Yogyakarta, the cultural heartland of the Javanese. Born to ethnic Javanese parents, he was the only child of his father's second marriage. His father, Kertasudiero, had 2 children from his previous marriage, and was a village irrigation official. His mother, Sukira, a local woman, was distantly related to Sultan Hamengkubuwono V by his first concubine. 5 weeks after Suharto's birth, his mother suffered a nervous breakdown and he was placed in the care of his paternal great-aunt, Kromadiro. Kertasudiero and Sukira divorced early in Suharto's life and both later remarried. At the age of 3, Suharto was returned to his mother, who had married a local farmer of whom Suharto helped in the rice paddies. In 1929, Suharto's father took him to live with his sister, who was married to an agricultural supervisor, Prawiro Ihardho. in the town of Wiryantoro in a poor and low-yielding farming area near Wonogiri. Over the following 2 years, he was taken back to his mother in Kemusuk by his stepfather and then back again to Wiryantoro by his father. Prawiroihardho took to raising the boy as his own, which provided Suharto a father figure and a stable home in Wiryantoro. In 1931, he moved to the town of Wonogiri to attend the primary school, living first with Prawirowajo's son Suladi, and later with his father's relative Hardyowihono. While living with Hardyowihono, Suharto became acquainted with Darjatmo, a Dukan of Javanese mystical arts and faith healing. The experience deeply affected him, and later, as president, Suharto surrounded himself with powerful symbolic language. Difficulties in paying the fees for his education in Wonogiri resulted in another move back to his father in Kemusuk, where he continued studying at Alofi Muhammadiyah Middle School in the city of Yogyakarta until 1939. Like many Javanese, Suharto had only one name. In religious contexts in recent years he has sometimes been called Haji or El Hajj Muhammad Suharto, but these names were not part of his formal name generally used. The spelling Suharto reflects modern Indonesian spelling, although the general approach in Indonesia is to rely on the spelling preferred by the person concerned. At the time of his birth, the standard transcription was Suharto, and he preferred the original spelling. The International English Language Press generally uses the spelling Suharto, while the Indonesian government and media use Suharto. Suharto's upbringing contrasts with that of leading Indonesian nationalists such as Sukarno in that he is believed to have had little interest in anti-colonialism or political concerns beyond his immediate surroundings. Unlike Sukarno and his circle, Suharto had little or no contact with European colonizers. Consequently, he did not learn to speak Dutch or other European languages in his youth. He learned to speak Dutch after his induction into the Dutch military in 1940. Military career. World War II and Japanese occupation. Suharto finished middle school at the age of 18 and took a clerical job at a bank in Wiryantoro. He was forced to resign after a bicycle mishap tore his only working clothes. Following a spell of unemployment, he joined the Royal Netherlands East Indies Army in June 1940, and undertook basic training in Gombong near Yogyakarta. With the Netherlands under German occupation and the Japanese pressing for access to Indonesian oil supplies, the Dutch had opened up the KNIL to large intakes of previously excluded Javanese. Suharto was assigned to Battalion 13 at Rampal, graduated from a short training course at KNIL Cadre School in Gombong to become a sergeant, and was posted to a KNIL Reserve Battalion in Cisarua. Following the Dutch surrender to the invading Japanese forces in March 1942, Suharto abandoned his KNIL uniform and went back to Wiryantoro. After months of unemployment, he then became one of thousands of Indonesians who took the opportunity to join Japanese organized security forces by joining the Yogyakarta police force. In October 1943, Suharto was transferred from the police force to the newly formed Japanese-sponsored militia, the PETA, in which Indonesians served as officers. In his training to serve with the rank of Shodancho, he encountered a localized version of the Japanese Bushido, or way of the warrior, used to indoctrinate troops. This training encouraged an anti-Dutch and pro-nationalist thought, although to toward the aims of the Imperial Japanese militarists. The encounter with a nationalistic and militarist ideology is believed to have profoundly influenced Suharto's own way of thinking. Suharto was posted to a Peta Coastal Defense Battalion at Waits, south of Yogyakarta, until he was admitted for training for company commander in Bogor from April to August 1944. As company commander, he conducted training for new Peta recruits in Surakarta, Jakarta, and Madiun. The Japanese surrender and proclamation of Indonesian independence in August 1945 occurred while Suharto was posted to the remote Brebag area to train new NCOs to replace those executed by the Japanese in the aftermath of the failed Peta Rebellion of February 1945 in Blitar, led by Supriat. Indonesian national revolution 2 days after the Japanese surrender in the Pacific. Independence leaders Sukarno and Hatta declared Indonesian independence, and were appointed president and vice president respectively of the new republic. Suharto disbanded his regiment in accordance with orders from the Japanese command, and returned to Yogyakarta. As republican groups rose to assert Indonesian independence, Suharto joined a new unit of the newly formed Indonesian Army. On the basis of his Peta experience, he was appointed deputy commander, and subsequently a battalion commander when the Republican forces were formally organized in October 1945. Suharto was involved in fighting against Allied troops around Magelang and Semarang, and was subsequently appointed head of a brigade as lieutenant colonel, having earned respect as a field commander. In the early years of the war, he organized local armed forces into Battalion X of Regiment I. Suharto was promoted major and became Battalion X's leader. The arrival of the Allies under a mandate to return the situation to the status quo antebellum quickly led to clashes between Indonesian Republicans and Allied forces, i.e., returning Dutch and assisting British forces. Suharto led his Division 10 troops to halt an advance by the Dutch T Brigade on 17 May 1946. It earned him the respect of Lieutenant Colonel Suharto Kusumadeo, who invited him to draft the working guidelines for the Battle Leadership Headquarters, a body created to organize and unify the command structure of the Indonesian nationalist forces. The military forces of the still infant Republic of Indonesia were constantly restructuring. By August 1946, Suharto was head of the 22nd Regiment of Division 3 stationed in Yogyakarta. In late 1946, the Diponegoro Division assumed responsibility for defense of the west and southwest of Yogyakarta from Dutch forces. Conditions at the time are reported by Dutch sources as miserable. Suharto himself is reported as assisting smuggling syndicates in the transport of opium through the territory he controlled, to generate income. In September 1948, Suharto was dispatched to meet Muso, chairman of the Indonesian Communist Party, in an unsuccessful attempt at a peaceful reconciliation of the communist uprising in Madiun. In December 1948, the Dutch launched Operation Crow, which resulted in the capture of Sukarno and Hatta and the capital Yogyakarta. Suharto was appointed to lead the Wetris III, consisting of 2 battalions, which waged guerrilla warfare against the Dutch from the hills south of Yogyakarta. In dawn raids on 1 March 1949, Suharto's forces and local militia recaptured the city, holding it until noon. Suharto's later accounts had him as the lone plotter, although other sources say Sultan Hamengkubuwono IX of Yogyakarta, under Panglima of the 3rd Division, ordered the attack. However, General Abdul Nasution said that Suharto took great care in preparing the general offensive. Civilians sympathetic to the Republican cause within the city had been galvanized by the show of force, which proved that the Dutch had failed to win the guerrilla war. Internationally, the United Nations Security Council pressured the Dutch to cease the military offensive and to recommence negotiations, which eventually led to the Dutch withdrawal from Yogyakarta area in June 1949 and a complete transfer of sovereignty in December 1949. Suharto was responsible for the takeover of Yogyakarta city from the withdrawing Dutch in June 1949. During the revolution, Suharto married Siti Hartina, the daughter of a minor noble in the Mangkunegaran royal house of Solo. The arranged marriage was enduring and supportive, lasting until Tian's death in 1996. The couple had 6 children: Siti Hardayanti Rukmana, Sigit Harjo Jadanto, Bambang Tripatmodho, Siti Hediati Hartomo Mandala Putra, and Siti Hutami Endang Adiningish. Within the Javanese upper class, it was considered acceptable for the wife to pursue genteel commerce to supplement the family budget, allowing her husband to keep his dignity in his official role. The commercial dealings of Tian, her children became extensive and ultimately undermined Suharto's presidency. Post-independence military career. In the years following Indonesian independence, Suharto served in the Indonesian National Army, primarily in Java. In 1950, as a colonel, he led the Garuda Brigade in suppressing the Makassar uprising, a rebellion of former colonial soldiers who supported the Dutch-established state of East Indonesia and its federal entity, the United States of Indonesia. During his year in Makassar, Suharto became acquainted with his neighbors, the Habibie family, whose eldest son B.J. Habibie was later Suharto's vice president, and went on to succeed him as president. In 1951–1952, Suharto led his troops in defeating the Islamic-inspired rebellion of Battalion 426 in the Klaten area of Central Java. Appointed to lead 4 battalions in early 1953, he organized the participation in battling Darul Islam insurgents in northwestern Central Java and anti-bandit operations in the Mount Merapi area. He also sought to stem leftist sympathies amongst his troops. His experience in this period left Suharto with a deep distaste for both Islamic and communist radicalism. Between 1956 and 1959, he served in the important position of commander of Diponegoro Division based in Semarang, responsible for Central Java and Yogyakarta provinces. His relationship with prominent businessmen Liem Sioe Leong and Bob Hassan, which extended throughout his presidency, began in Central Java, where he was involved in a series of profit-generating enterprises conducted primarily to keep the poorly funded military unit functioning. Army anti-corruption investigations implicated Suharto in a 1959 smuggling scandal. Relieved of his position, he was transferred to the Army Staff and Command School in the city of Bandung. While in Bandung, he was promoted to Brigadier General, and in late 1960, promoted to Army Deputy Chief of Staff. In 1961, he was given an additional command as head of the Army's new Strategic Reserve, a ready reaction air mobile force based in Jakarta. In January 1962, Suharto was promoted to the rank of Major General and appointed to lead Operation Mandala, a joint Army and Navy Air Force command based in Makassar. This formed the military side of the campaign to win Western New Guinea from the Dutch, who were preparing it for its own independence, separate from Indonesia. In 1965, Suharto was assigned operational command of Sukarno's confrontation confrontation against the newly formed Malaysia, fearful that confrontation would leave Java thinly covered by the army, and hand control to the 2 million-strong Indonesian Communist Party. He authorized a Kostrad intelligence officer, Ali Murtopo, to open secret contacts with the British and Malaysians. Overthrow of Sukarno. Background tensions between the military and communists increased in April 1965, when Sukarno endorsed the immediate implementation of the PKI's proposal for a fifth armed force consisting of armed peasants and workers. However, this idea was rejected by the army's leadership as being tantamount to the PKI establishing its own armed forces. In May, the Gilchrist document aroused Sukarno's fear of a military plot to overthrow him, a fear which he mentioned repeatedly during the next few months. On his Independence Day speech in August, Sukarno declared his intention to commit Indonesia to an anti-imperialist alliance with China and other communist regimes, and warned the army not to interfere. While Sukarno devoted his energy for domestic and international politics, the economy of Indonesia deteriorated rapidly with worsening widespread poverty and hunger, while foreign debt obligations became unmanageable and infrastructure crumbled. Sukarno's guided democracy stood on fragile grounds due to the inherent conflict between its two underlying support pillars, the military and the communists. The military, nationalists, and the Islamic groups were shocked by the rapid growth of the Communist Party under Sukarno's protection. They feared imminent establishment of communist state in Indonesia. By 1965, the PKI had 3 million members, and were particularly strong in Central Java and Bali. PKI has become the strongest political party in Indonesia. Abortive coup and anti-communist purge before dawn on 1 October 1965. 6 army generals were kidnapped and executed in Jakarta by soldiers from the Presidential Guard, Diponegoro Division, and Broadjaya Division. Soldiers occupied Merdeka Square, including the areas in front of the Presidential Palace, the National Radio Station, and Telecommunications Center. At 7:10 a.m. Tung Binsiam Shuri announced on radio that the 30th of September movement had forestalled a coup attempt on Sukarno by CIA-backed, power-mad generals, and that it was an internal army affair. The 30th of September movement never made any attempt on Suharto's life. Suharto had been in Jakarta Army Hospital that evening with his 3-year-old son Tommy, who had a scalding injury. It was here that he was visited by Colonel Abdul Latif, a key member of the 30th of September movement and close family friend of Suharto. According to Latif's later testimony, the conspirators assumed Suharto to be a Sukarno loyalist. Hence Latif went to inform him of the impending kidnapping plan to save Sukarno from treacherous generals, upon which Suharto seemed to offer his neutrality. Upon being told of the killings, Suharto went to KOSDRAD headquarters just before dawn, from where he could see soldiers occupying Merdeka Square. He mobilized KOSDRAD and RPKAD special forces to seize control of the center of Jakarta, capturing key strategic sites including the radio station without resistance. Suharto announced over the radio at 9 p.m. that 6 generals had been kidnapped by counter-revolutionaries, and that the 30th of September movement actually intended to overthrow Sukarno. He said he was in control of the army, and that he would crush the 30th of September movement and safeguard Sukarno. Suharto issued an ultimatum to Halim Air Force Base, where the G3OS had based themselves and where Sukarno, Air Force Commander Omar Dhani and PKI Chairman Dipper Nusantara Radich had gathered, causing them to disperse before Suharto's soldiers occupied the airbase on the 2nd of October after short fighting. With the failure of the poorly organized coup, and having secured authority from the president to restore order and security, Suharto's faction was firmly in control of the army by the 2nd of October. On the 5th of October, Suharto led a dramatic public ceremony to bury the generals' bodies. Complicated and partisan theories continue to this day of the identity of the attempted coup's organizers and their aims. The army's version, and subsequently that of the New Order, was that the PKI was solely responsible. A propaganda campaign by the army, and Islamic and Catholic student groups, convinced both Indonesian and international audiences that it was a communist coup attempt, and that the killings were cowardly atrocities against Indonesian heroes. The army, in alliance with religious civilian groups, led a campaign to purge Indonesian society, government, and armed forces of the Communist Party and leftist organizations. The purge spread from Jakarta to much of the rest of the country. The most widely accepted estimates are that at least 500,000 were killed. As many as 1.5 million were imprisoned at one stage or another. As a result of the purge, one of Sukarno's three pillars of support, the Indonesian Communist Party, was effectively eliminated by the other two. The military and political Islam power struggle. Sukarno continued to command loyalty from large sections of the armed forces as well as the general population, and Suharto was careful not to be seen to be seizing power in his own coup. For 18 months following the quashing of the 30th of September movement, there was a complicated process of political maneuvers against Sukarno, including student agitation, stacking of parliament, media propaganda and military threats. In January 1966, university students under the banner of Kami began demonstrations against the Sukarno government, voicing demands for the disbandment of PKI and control of hyperinflation. The students received support and protection with the army, with Suharto often engaging in coordination meetings with student leaders. Street fights broke out between the students and pro-Sukarno loyalists, with the pro-Suharto students prevailing due to army protection. In February 1966, Sukarno promoted Suharto to lieutenant general. The killing of a student demonstrator and Sukarno's order for the disbandment of Kami in February 1966 further galvanized public opinion against the president. On the 11th of March 1966, the appearance of unidentified troops around Merdeka Palace during a cabinet meeting forced Sukarno to flee to Bogor Palace by helicopter. Three Suhartoist generals, Major General Basuki Rahmat, Brigadier General M. Jusuf, and Brigadier General Amir Mahmud, went to Bogor to meet Sukarno. There, they secured a presidential decree that gave Suharto authority to take any action necessary to maintain security. Using the Super Samar letter, Suharto ordered the banning of PKI the following day and proceeded to purge pro-Sukarno elements from the parliament, the government and military, accusing them of being communist sympathizers. The army arrested 15 cabinet ministers and forced Sukarno to appoint a new cabinet consisting of Suharto supporters. The army arrested pro-Sukarno and pro-communist members of the MPRS, and Suharto replaced chiefs of the Navy, Air Force, and a police force with his supporters, who then began an extensive purge within each services. In June 1966, the now purged parliament passed 24 resolutions including the banning of Marxism-Leninism, ratifying the Super Samar, and stripping Sukarno of his title of President for life. Against the wishes of Sukarno, the government ended confrontation with Malaysia and rejoined the United Nations. Suharto did not seek Sukarno's outright removal at this MPRS session due to the remaining support for the president amongst elements of the armed forces. By January 1967, Suharto felt confident that he had removed all significant support for Sukarno within the armed forces, and the MPRS decided to hold another session to impeach Sukarno. On the 22nd of February 1967, Sukarno announced he would resign from the presidency, and on the 12th of March, the MPRS session stripped him of his remaining power and named Suharto acting president. Sukarno was placed under house arrest in Bogor Palace. Little more was heard from him, and he died in June 1970. On the 27th of March 1968, the MPRS appointed Suharto for the first of his 5-year terms as president.